Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our current edition of Tough Talks. The theme of today's Tough Talk is called The Common Denominator. And what that is about is we decided to have a conversation about a certain phenomenon that we all see in our lives. We all know people who struggle with this. Many people move through relationships, friendships, and workplaces and have the same or similar negative experience over and over. So the narrative they end up constructing places themselves in the role of the victim and other people in the roles of the transgressors. This narrative is comforting and reassuring, but it also can hinder growth and development. If all these different people, workplaces, and situations all seem to return the same result for this person, the common denominator is actually this person. If the problem is always other people, there can be no real accountability and ownership. And without that, there can be no real growth. If we want to get different, more positive outcomes in the future, we must be aware of the quality of the choices and decisions that we make, as these are also part of the story. Taking accountability and ownership is not the same as taking blame. Blame is a generally unhelpful term that mostly stifles genuine engagement and understanding. And without engagement and understanding, there can be no real growth. And without growth, nothing in the future will be different from our past or present. So Magda is going to share her insights as a psychological counselor who encounters many such cases as these in her work. And so handing over to you, Magda, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you very much. So, as you have indicated, there's a big difference between assigning blame and saying, you are the problem here versus taking accountability. Because if we look at it just logically, a relationship is two or more people. So there's a give and take that happens there. And as you are then part of that relationship, you would also have to do some looking at yourself. If you get the same feedback from everybody that you're in a relationship with, or you feel that all the people that you've been in relationships with are abusive or are narcissistic or whatever the case may be, that is completely possible. But then it also highlights for you that there is perhaps some more healing that you need to do. So you would also then have to look inwardly and reflect on why is it that you keep having these experiences? What potential healing do you still need to do? What support would you need in that in order to break this pattern that you then don't engage with this type of person anymore? So for that, you can go to the normal things such as journaling or meditate, well, normal, to identify your own patterns in that. You can go to therapy. We are also actually busy working on a reader that would help assist with that. So once it's complete, it will be up on our website that you can go have a look at in order to support you in this.
Okay, yeah, continue.
No? Go for it.
Okay, so how is it? The trick here is that if a person has built a narrative where they are the victim and other people are the transgressors, it's then going to be very difficult for them to step out of that narrative and start looking more honestly, more accurately at their own choices and decisions. So how, like practical things, someone who thinks, okay, maybe I need to reflect more on what I'm doing that might be feeding into these situations. What practical things, what practical prompts could a person reflect on?
Okay, so when we look at something like that, there would have been a point in life where that person would have genuinely been a victim. And being the victim of a trauma or abusive relationship or something like that is never your fault. How you then go about dealing with that, unfortunately, does become your responsibility, because you have a responsibility to yourself now for healing and for further growth and development. It doesn't mean that you are taking blame for this. It doesn't mean that you are excusing what happened. It means that you are now building forward so you can grow and develop from there, because that is also not the place you want to be stuck, because you remaining stuck in that position is exactly what the goal is of the perpetrators usually, because it's a place of you being in less power. So you taking accountability for your healing and growth is you stepping into your power and taking the control further back to yourself. instead of handing it to these other people. So it's just to underscore again, it's not to assign blame. Trauma is never your fault. But now, like we are indicating, the healing is then becomes your responsibility and something that you can do to take your power and control back. So very practical things would be, is this a pattern I'm seeing in my life? Yes. Okay. What can we now do about it? Because it's not comfortable having these conversations about ourselves or about our loved ones. Because you always feel like, but the person has been through a lot. Yes, we are not taking away from that. The person has been through a lot. But now we want to empower that person to take their control and everything back, because this also cannot be the life that this person then wants to lead or that you then want to lead. You would want to step into that role and empower yourself, heal, and go from there. So you can journal, you can meditate, you can speak to friends who could potentially assist you in what they've observed, what they feel things would be that you could have a look at. You could go to therapy. There are quite a few things practically that you can then engage in, but it is not an easy thing to do because obviously it means taking a real hard look at some very difficult things.
Can you talk a bit about how this might pan out in a family setting where there's a set dynamic in the family and everybody's kind of trapped in these roles? And now one person in that group wants things to be different, but that means having difficult conversations with the family members, maybe renegotiating certain personal boundaries, and that might not get a very positive response from the other people who are then trapped in their roles, particularly in a group that has a set dynamic. Can you talk a bit more about that?
So let's say, you have a family of 4 people, and then one person, let's say one of the children in the family had an accident or something when they were very young. So they were then locked in to this, you were the victim of this trauma that happened to you. So now your sibling has to sacrifice on your behalf because they can't do X, Y, and Z in terms of, sports and other activities they want to do because it clashes with the things you want to do. And your parents are absolutely enforcing that you must do the things you want to do because you were this victim. And yes, fair enough. For a part of the healing, that is something that happens because naturally you go to support the family member that needs the support. But let's say, for example, this happened when everybody was in primary school. And now as adults at varsity or in your jobs, this is still what's happening. This cannot be the narrative that you're sitting with because one sibling cannot the whole time be sacrificed for so that the other sibling can gain. And that is then something that the sibling would want to address with the family. But that can be met with, you have no sympathy for what your sibling went through. This is a very cold-hearted thing, and on the criticism will go. So it also needs to be addressed in a very empathetic way to say, I completely understand what we went through as a family. We were all there. We all saw it. It had impact on all of us. However, we have now moved past the stage of this being a crisis. We have done all the things that needed to be done. There's been medical intervention, there's been psychological intervention. Would you not want for my sibling's life, for her or him to now be empowered and in control and not be seen as, the victim or the person this happened to? Because that can also not be nice. You would want to have the power and control back in your life. Yes, it's a part of your story, but it doesn't have to define who you are. So there's quite a bit that can happen there. The trick would be not to go in at it, assigning blame to say you did this and you did that, but to approach it as how can we as a family perhaps address this? And this is how all these things are making me feel. So not saying when you do this, it makes me feel like, start with, when something like this were to happen, my feeling is that, no, that it is in a more delicate, empathetic way and that there can be a real conversation around it.
Very difficult to do. I think in that kind of situation, someone would probably need to chat to a counsellor or get advice on how to structure that, because I think it would be quite emotionally demanding to deal with the probably negative response that'll come from the family initially. Can you talk about how something like this dynamic, the common denominator dynamic, might pan out in the workplace, where a person is having similar kinds of relationships or experiences in the workplace with their colleagues or with their bosses. They move from workplace to workplace, it's different people, new environment, but they're getting this recurring pattern that's happening. And it's related to their performance at work or how they fit into the team dynamic. Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like?
So for the workplace, it gets a bit more tricky because obviously there are certain professional rules and regulations that need to be adhered to, company policies, etc. But a nice thing to have a look at is also the job you are in. We understand with, the economic pressures and everything we all face, that salary is obviously a huge consideration, and that's fair because it's something we all need to live and to survive. But now, this job that you are in, do you have an actual aptitude for it? Is this something that genuinely makes you happy in doing? Do you have a passion for what you're doing? Can you see how this would make a difference in the world? Or, does it bring you joy doing this thing? Or is it just something that you're doing because you need the income? And while the income is very important and, we need it to support our families and to go on with life, we also need to look at what your actual aptitude and interest is, because it could very well be that you are in a setting of, let's say, for example, you studied economics because this is something that yields a good salary. And that was the thing you took into account, which is important to consider. But now you're actually in the field, you're working, and it irritates you that all your colleagues are very enthusiastic and you feel it's almost fake. And you feel you're getting picked on because you're constantly getting negative feedback. But what could actually be happening is your colleagues could genuinely love economics and they could have studied that because that is their passion. And because they have a natural aptitude for it and they're passionate about it, they tend to yield better results than somebody who is just going through the motions because that is what they're getting paid to do. So that could be where the feedback is then coming from. So having a look at, is this really something that brings me joy? What are the things that could potentially bring me joy? Even if you want to stay in the economics field, is there a different branch of economics or something that I could grow and develop into, or change my track and speak to my managers about, growing and developing into certain roles that would bring me joy and that I have that passion and that affinity for? Or seeing, is there perhaps a relationship dynamic happening in the office? So with one person perhaps being dramatic and enjoying spreading the gossip about, the office gossip, and that such a person would then trigger you, or are you that person? And you are using that to get social capital because you feel somehow that is how you can advance because you're not as confident about your skills. So what are the things that are realistically in front of you and what could potentially be done to change those? Because in a corporate system or a work dynamic, those things are usually locked in. So for you to then see a change in that system, you would be the one that needs to be the catalyst for the change. So to look internally as to what are the things potentially that you can look at. And maybe if it's, finding a different job in a line that you're actually passionate in, yes. If it's maybe meeting with your manager and seeing how you can grow and develop in the field into a course or a career that you are passionate about, yes. So seeing which things you can do around that, or if it's, co-worker dynamics, are you able to move offices that you are away from the person who trigger you? Because you tend to get the same set of people in every office. They're just differentiated a bit. So how can you go about dealing with those different things if you find that that is a trigger for you?
So I think at the end of the day, what we're hoping people will take away from today's Tough Talks is, if in your life you're seeing certain recurring patterns, either in the family or friendships, romantic relationships, in the workplace, and these are not producing good results for you, and at the same time you've developed this narrative where other people are the problem and you are the victim, while there may be some truth in that, that narrative hinders your own growth and development. So to snap out of that narrative and start to look at not assigning blame, but looking at personal accountability, personal ownership. What can I change and do differently so that I'm going to get different, more positive results? At the end of the day, it's a quality of life. and the system is not going to change, other people aren't going to change, but you can improve your outlook, you can improve your mental health skills, your life skills, your social functioning skills, acquire new knowledge, qualifications. There's a lot that we can do to grow and develop ourselves that will in turn kickstart more positive outcomes along the way. So I think that's what our takeaway for today is looking at the common denominator, which is us, without assigning blame, but looking at what can we do differently so that we're getting better results instead of maintaining this narrative where, this keeps happening to me. It may be, but if you want that to be different in the future, something over here has to change. And that doesn't mean you're at fault or you're to blame. It just means you have the power to make certain small changes that might kick into motion, cascading and positive results. Are you happy with is there anything else you'd like to share, Magda, before we wrap up?
No, I think just to link to what you're saying, this is literally not about assigning blame. It's into you deciding to step into your power, to take that control back and to see where you need healing, where you need support, and what you can do to change the things within yourself, the things you have control over, and then potentially that having an effect on your broader systems so that you can see a different result.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on today's TAF Talks. And thank you, Magda, for making yourselves available. And we will see you all again in our next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.